You were just at the Richard Marles media conference, a lengthy one, going through the detail on all of this. But first of all, I thought it was quite striking how strong Richard Marles was on the risk that Australia faced, really answering the why we are spending $368 billion on these submarines.
And you do have to lay that out, Laura, as a government. As you say, this is a huge expenditure over the next 3 decades, and the Australian people deserve to know why. Why does this need to be a priority for the government? He laid that out in some detail, as you say, the changing region, the word that never gets uttered, but really the reason why these things are so crucial is China's military capability. They're considered to be our adversary in the region, and there needs to be an ability to protect ourselves. The old diesel fleet of submarines is ageing. We know that the Collins class, that Scott Morrison, the former Prime Minister, dramatically scrapped the deal with the French that would have provided us not a nuclear-powered fleet of submarines. That's a game changer in terms of technology. The ability to acquire this from the United States puts Australia out of essentially middle power status here, Laura. We are the 7th nation, once we get this capability, to have a nuclear-powered fleet of submarines. So it is a massive leap forward, one that doesn't come without its own logistical challenges.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Still, the warning was the biggest conventional build-up in our region. This is not Australia's doing, i.e. it's China, and Australia needs to step up. So a real warning there from Richard Marles. I think walking that very fine line of not over warmongering, but also bringing Australia to the realities of what is happening on our doorstep. I also thought it interesting, maybe you can explain this to us a little bit more, Trudy, about what is happening on the nuclear side. I mean, Joe Biden was at pains to point out, and I'm sure a very appreciative Anthony Albanese for doing so, that this is not about nuclear weapons, it's about nuclear-powered submarines. But it does, when you mention the word nuclear, I mean, when this was first floated, the Greens, Adam Bandt described it as floating Chernobyls, and that conjures up all kinds of images and disasters. But Richard Marles went into some detail about what nuclear facilities will be in Australia.
And one of those key questions that he was thrown at many times in this press conference, Laura, is what happens to the waste? Now, this isn't a problem we face in the coming years. This is when the nuclear-powered submarines, the Virginias, which we're purchasing, and then subsequently the ones we build ourselves. What do we do once the reactor on board that needs to be retired? And essentially, you've got this waste in perpetuity going forward. Now, on that point, Richard Marles would not say where this will go. There is a process that will now take place over the next 12 months, we're told, to determine exactly where the waste will be stored. He did commit that it will be on defence land. He did, interestingly, say future defence land, which opened the door to a question of whether they could acquire the Kimber facility in South Australia. There's always been a lot of talk about that as a nuclear waste site, but no confirmation on that. Just a lot of speculation that we will see this happen in South Australia. That is not confirmed, though, by the government.
Yeah, South Australia, Peter Malinauskas, I spoke to the Premier a little bit earlier. He was pretty happy about the Collins class submarines and the life cycle essentially being extended there. But a lot of questions that are being asked, how does this all fit in? Like, aren't we making it a little bit too complex? We've got 3 different submarines on the go. We've got different skill sets across 3 different countries.
Well, the argument from the Vice Admiral who's been running the AUKUS task force, Admiral Mead, for the last 18 months, is that this is a doable prospect, that it is, we are able to have 3 submarines essentially on the go. That would be most likely in the early 2040s where that would be the instance, but that wouldn't be for long. That at that point the Collins class would be retired, and then you have 2 fleets of nuclear-powered submarines, but they are similar, was the essence of the argument coming from the government. It's not like we haven't seen 2 submarines running at the same time before in Australia. I think a really interesting fight, Laura, is what happens to the extension of the Collins class fleet. This is something the coalition promised to do, that all 6 of these submarines would get so-called life of type extension, and that happens in South Australia. I put that to the Defence Minister this morning. He is not providing that guarantee that essentially a future government, Laura, should be able to decide whether you do ultimately do the 6th submarine for a life of type extension, or if at that point it isn't required. So I'd expect that to be a pretty big flashpoint. The Shadow Foreign Minister, Simon Birmingham, has told me this morning that that would be what Richard Marles has said today, creates a massive uncertainty for South Australia, given now he can't say all 6 will actually be upgraded.